An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way. We must be united at home to defeat our adversaries abroad.
Probably the line of the night. Ridiculous partisan investigations made headlines after the State of the Union last night. Maybe not the way the president intended. Check out this list. Just about every Trump entity is the subject of at least one probe. The latest one to blow up the inauguration. Now, subpoenas have just gone out. Federal prosecutors demanding information on the committee's spending, the donations, and whether any of that money is illegal foreign cash. Well, that subpoena list adds some serious offenses that are being investigated. And they're all on your screen right now. We're talking conspiracy against the United States, false statements, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and much more. A lot to unpack here, and we always bring in our next guest to help us with that, former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. He served in the Justice Department's National Security Division. I know nothing surprises anymore, but he went there last night, and I guess the best you can do is nice try, but it's not going to fly. We went through the laundry list, Joe, in terms of how every entity from the campaign to the administration to the foundation, I mean, even the inaugural committee and so many more are all concurrently subjects of probes by either a common investigator or others. It's really quite a list. I mean, you got to work at it, right?
Richard, hello from Washington. So you're right. The president never said the name Robert Mueller in his State of the Union address last night, but his reference to ridiculous partisan investigations could mean a number of things. It could mean the Russia probe, which is nearing a 2-year mark now coming up. It could mean the at least 2 investigations out of the Southern District of New York. Or it could mean the ever-developing investigations that will come from the House of Representatives as the Democrats now wield the chairmanships and, more importantly, subpoena power. So you can expect that as the president goes into his 3rd year in office, he will face a flurry of legal activity that don't seem to be ending anytime soon.
Are you confident, Joseph, that I saw both Nadler and Schiff for the respective committees. Are they going to be able to not step on the toes of Mueller? Are these things going to be able to do, in effect, do they need to wait for Mueller to finish, or are they going to do them at the same time but stay in their lane?
Richard, great question, because I have no doubt that the Democrats, after 2 long years in the minority, are eager to use that investigative power that they accuse the Republicans of effectively slow walking. However, to your point, it will be difficult for the House Democrats to be really aggressive when it comes to Russia if it means looking into the same things that the special counsel is looking into. You don't want witnesses that are cooperating or not cooperating with the special counsel now appearing before Congress, possibly making their testimony public, possibly having leaks to come out that could injure or impede the special counsel's investigation. So I think they're going to have to tread very lightly when it comes to Russia and the 2016 election. Now, when it comes to other financial transactions, the Trump Organization, the Trump Inaugural Committee, things that are not being handled actively by the special counsel, I think the House could have a little more latitude, but they will have to tread lightly.
I want you to listen to a clip from, of all people, Chris Christie. And as a reminder, Christie not only had a role with the campaign, he was also running the transition for a while before Jared Kushner, by at least Christie's account, pushed him out the door. But nonetheless, listen to what Chris Christie had to say about the significance of the latest probe looking specifically into the inauguration.
These subpoenas are coming from the Southern District of New York to the Inaugural Committee. What do you think of that?
I've always thought that that was the bigger problem for 2 reasons. One, because the Southern District of New York has no restrictions on their purview. Right? Bob Mueller has a task. It's Russian interference and potential collusion in the 2016 election. Southern District of New York is whatever the heck you want. And so,
particularly if you find stuff.
That's right. And you've got Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer, as a tour guide. That means you could go anywhere.
Put a finer point on that, if you could, Joseph. Why should Trump right now be so concerned about the probe? Who's doing the investigating? And I've been doing some reading up on this. We're going to hear a lot of names like Tom Barrack and Colony talk about some of the players that may emerge in this and why this is of such concern to the president potentially.
So, Richard, regardless of what you think about former Governor Christie's politics, he has a good reputation for straight talk, and I think he is, in fact, really saying what he believes and kind of calling it like it is. So, to his point, a lot of us that have watched the Mueller probe for a long time now, when Michael Cohen's office was raided in the Southern District of New York last year, a lot of us felt that's the real danger here. Robert Mueller has a mandate, and he can't go too far outside that mandate, which is looking for cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. And he can't go far beyond that without getting permission. And at the same time, he has to report out. And those reports can ultimately go to the White House if some think that that's in fact happening. We can discuss whether that's appropriate or not. So, but there are some safeguards around the special counsel's investigation. Now, contrast that with what's going on in New York. There are absolutely no boundaries to what federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York can look at. They can look at financial crimes. They can look at campaign finance violations. They can look at money laundering. They can look at obstruction. Anything. There's no boundaries in terms of time, in terms of scope, and that is a fiercely, fiercely independent office. They answer to virtually no one. So if I had to guess as to where the real danger is here for this administration, it's less likely to be with a special counsel, more likely to be up in the Southern District of New York.
Interesting. Now, again, we're going to have to wait, but there does seem to be a pattern, Joseph, and again, your background with national security. There are clear rules about who can put money in as it relates to foreign governments, let alone foreign companies, with inaugurations, et cetera. But if you follow the thread that a lot of people have been making, the dots at least connected from Trump for the last 25 plus years, whenever there was financial hardships or bankruptcies that he was running into, and a lot of the U.S. banks wouldn't lend money, all of a sudden money came from the Russians. Now, people have had a lot of questions as to whether money was ever washed at some of these properties, commercial or residential, or even houses, or whatever the case may be. But for $107 million to flow into inauguration, when the campaign struggled mightily to raise any money, and really he campaigned with free media, it didn't pass the smell test. And now the idea of actually producing where the money was spent, who gave the money, et cetera, it may be more than just the day of the inauguration, but potentially, unless you disagree with me, could it also go back to what maybe the Mueller team, let alone the independent folks, have found going back 10, 20 years? We could be talking about some of the same players doing some of the same things.
Richard, I don't disagree with you. It's certainly possible that one possibility is that the Inauguration Committee investigation starts and ends right there, with looking at one, where the money came from, and two, how it was spent. That's serious enough. Another possibility is that it's one piece of a larger puzzle that tells part of the story about Donald Trump's ongoing relationship with Russia, whether it be political relationships or business relationships. A lot of people want to see his tax returns. They want to know more about his history because they want to understand what is his history with doing business in Russia and looking for opportunities in Russia. Because at the same time, if Russia is being accused of helping him win an election, it's more vital than ever that we understand what, if any, were his business connections there.
Now, one of the things we know from the inauguration is it was a family affair in many cases. I want to listen, if we could for a second, to another former federal prosecutor who say maybe a lot of roads lead to Donald Jr.
We've seen Mueller use people's kids to get to folks in the past. He could do this with Trump Jr. Trump Jr. went into the Senate Intelligence Committee, took an oath to tell the truth, and lied his butt off.
You think he'll get indicted?
If that's what Roger Stone and Michael Cohen get indicted for, lying to the Senate Intelligence Committee, if Trump Jr. lied, then he gets indicted too.
And Joseph, that Paul Butler saying Donnie Jr. could be next. We've been hearing that for a while. Talk about that, because it wouldn't just be yet another person indicted. Now there's both the optics of it and practical nature of it. You're talking about the son of the president. Do you believe that's more than just possible? It's maybe even probable?
Richard, I'd say it's definitely possible from what we know. I hate to make judgments because we've been wrong so many times on different things here, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility because we know Donald Jr. was a key player in certain key events, most notably the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016, which sparked a lot of consternation about what exactly was the level of coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. So it's certainly a possibility. Now, if that happens, that is not the run-of-the-mill prosecution that any old federal prosecutor could just bring on his or her own. That would require extremely high-level sign-off within the Justice Department, and no doubt would spark an epic battle about whether or not a prosecution would be allowed to continue by the White House, whether the White House should ever be interceding with prosecutions, particularly with respect to the president's own family, and then most importantly, would it lead to a pardon? And the whole debate about whether the president should or could pardon a member of his own family.
Finally, we got word today that yet another one of the prosecutors working on the Mueller team is going to be stepping down. A lot of people read the tea leaves and say that means he might be wrapping up. But for me, how does that happen when we have yet another revelation like we mentioned with the inauguration? And maybe, Joseph, is it that for all of us, myself included, who want a neat bow tied around this thing and to have a story told to us from start to finish, we're not going to get that because, as you said, you know, what they're doing in the Southern District might be completely separate than what Mueller's doing. Talk about timeline here a little bit and maybe final product.
Well, I wouldn't read too much into the story that one more prosecutor has basically been reassigned back to Main Justice. We've seen this before. We've made predictions about whether Robert Mueller is going to wind down, if he's in the final stretch. We heard from Chuck Grassley earlier this week that we might get a report within a month. Then he kind of walked that back. So I think it's a really difficult game to try to sort of game out when Robert Mueller will be finished. But you're absolutely right, though. What's going on in New York really is separate. It may have sprung from the Mueller probe, and there might be some overlap, but at the end of the day, that's going to have a life of its own. It will go where the evidence leads, and I would imagine since we're only seeing a subpoena at this point, the investigation's been going on for some while, but it's got a lot of road to go.
Joseph Marino, as always, great job. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. It's always a pleasure.
And coming up next, shutdown negotiations do continue, but the question is, are they really making any tangible progress? Also, President Trump, he sounded conciliatory, at least at parts last night, but will the State of the Union actually move the needle? ABC News political director Rick Klein will join us to discuss all of that and much more.